I'm excited to introduce Sean Simmons with Anglers Atlas. Sean is the founder and president of Anglers Atlas as well as My Catch. Angler Atlas started off as a way to provide fishing maps and data to anglers to go fishing. They also found out this is a great way to provide information to biologists who are trying to manage those fisheries. This led to Sean's involvement with a task force on electronic reporting, a group that reported to NOAA's Marine Fisheries Advisory Committee, which provided guidance on a suite of factors to consider when implementing or using electronic reporting. Today, Sean is going to talk to us about the paper he recently published, as well as other projects he has going on. And from this, Sean, I will now make you the presenter.
Great, thank you very much, Chip. Am I coming through all right? Oh,
yes, you are.
There we go. Okay, let me just get used to this new panel. So I think you see the whole screen. I think there's a way I can just share the, let's see.
Should be that yellow button there. Is that correct?
Yellow,
to the left of the yellow button, it should be the slideshow.
Slideshow.
Yep.
Does that work for you?
That's perfect.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Chip. Greatly appreciate the opportunity to present. If people can see me on the camera, you'll notice there's a big map behind me. And I like to use that quite a bit, referencing places. I'll start with where I'm coming to you from. I'm up here in Canada, a place called Prince George. And if anyone can see the map, there's basically Vancouver's down here, Vancouver. I'm about 9 hours north in the central interior of British Columbia. So I am quite far way away from the South Atlantic region, and so not very familiar with the fisheries there, but I've had a bit of a chance to get to know it through the MAFAC task force that Chip was mentioning. But what I'm going to be talking to you today is focused on what we're doing here, primarily in Canada, but we have some really interesting projects happening in the US as well, which I'll touch on. So I'll start with a little bit of background on me. I'm a limnologist by training. I studied a lake around Prince George. I went through a massive fish kill in 1993. While I was doing my research for the master's program, I discovered this amazing treasure trove of data which sat literally collecting dust on the shelves of local ministry offices with detailed bathymetric maps, fish stocking information, all this other great information about the local lakes in the region. And I thought, if you like fishing, this stuff is gold. So after I graduated, I started publishing maps and put it online, and basically grew an audience of anglers out that way. And so that's what brought me to this place where I'm able to start reaching out to anglers and generating data for research and science purposes. So what I'd like to do is really start with why this matters. And as you can see, the map on the screen is the one that's right behind me as well, showcases the vast network of water bodies. Now, I understand you're primarily in the saltwater side. I've been mostly in the freshwater with a little bit of saltwater. But certainly up here in Canada, there's easily 1 million fish-bearing waters, probably something closer to 10 million, depending on how you define water bodies. And very little information is known. I mean, conventional survey techniques, whether they be creel surveys, netting surveys, electrofishing, mail-in surveys, are very time-intensive, labor-intensive, resource-intensive. And as a result, very few of these water bodies get sampled. And so the idea here is that if we're able to tap into this army of anglers, I mean, Canada alone, I think, has 4 million licensed anglers every year. If we're able to tap into even a subset of them and basically equip them with a way of reporting out data on a standardized format so they can be used for scientific analysis, we have the potential to unlock enormous amounts of information about the state of our fisheries. And so that's sort of the dream and the concept that got founded when I embarked on this project. And we call it the My Catch project because it's a little bit different than Anglers Atlas. Anglers Atlas was always built primarily as a tool to help anglers get out there and go fishing. My Catch was really, okay, can we use this audience of anglers that we built to start answering key scientific and management questions? And so I think it's really important to emphasize why this really matters, is because we have the potential to to not only add some more data, but add it by orders of magnitude. And that's the really big win. Now, whether it's achievable or not, that's another question, which I'll get into shortly. That really is the intent behind this. So what I'm going to focus on today are three core topics, starting with what techniques we've used to motivate anglers to report their catches. Second, how we, once we get the data in, how we evaluate the quality, what methods we use evaluating the quality of the data that is collected. And then third, how this self-reported angler data can be useful from both a research and a management perspective. So let me just jump in with some motivations. So what is it that motivates anglers for our platform? And essentially, it's free fishing maps. Oh, I don't know, something just happened there.
Yeah, it looks like you went to your other screen.
Oh, I don't know how that happened. Let's see. Oh, okay, there we go. You can see it again?
Not yet.
Oh, that's weird.
If you look at the button that shows show my screen, there it just went up.
Yeah, it just keeps flipping back. Okay, well, let me try this a little bit differently.
That was
what. This way. Can you kind of see it this way?
It's going to be better if you click on show my slides, or the slideshow. There you go. Yep.
Okay, we're back on it. Thanks. Okay, so starting with motivation. So why is it that anglers like us? Well, because we give them free fishing maps. That was really the foundation. Here's an example of a map that we produced. We do it old school as well as digital. We do these things called magazines, or we used to anyways. And this is an example from one of our magazines, but essentially it's the same information that's presented on the website. You can see the detailed bathymetry on the lake. And for a lot of anglers, especially new anglers, to this water body, the bathymetry is really valuable if you want to scope out places where you want to go fishing. And then what we do is we interview local tackle shops, local resorts, anyone that has a connection to that water body that can share that personalized, localized information. And we sort of write articles on them. And for many years, that was sort of the core foundation of what we did. We published maps across the country, both online and in magazine format. We generate a revenue through advertising, and we really tell the story of local fishing destinations. This would be lakes, it'd be rivers, and some ocean destinations as well. But this is the reason I'm highlighting this is this was really the reason that anglers came to us. Now, there's other things that motivate the anglers as well. Things like fish species presence, stocking data, access information, fishing regulations, weather forecasts, flow rates, etc. So these are all things that we can use as motivations to get anglers to come to us. So when we're thinking about this from a citizen science perspective, understanding the nature of that motivation is a really key part. And if you can tap into the right motivation, you can start to build an audience based on that. And there are many examples across the board of where this type of motivation takes place. Now, once we've got the audience, there's two data capture strategies that we use. One is a passive strategy, where basically the angler journey, and when we're in the tech world, we think about the user journey. So what's the moment at which you first touch somebody in your audience? For us, it's the anglers. And what does that journey look like as they go through your, in this case, it'd be a website to acquire what they're interested in. In this case, it'd be a map. And there are a whole bunch of touch points through that. And it's presenting something through that user journey with a call to action that basically they can reply to. Now, the other strategy we use is we call it active, and this is where you use promotions and events and things like that to recruit anglers to come to your project, whatever that may be. So here's an example of a passive web strategy. You can see in the background there's the web page we have for Wabamun Lake, and as I mentioned, we've been doing maps and information on fisheries, and what we do on the website is every single water body and even areas of the ocean, we'll segment it out to specific regions or management units as a dedicated landing page. And the reason we did this primarily is to help with the search engine optimization. So when somebody types in, I'm going fishing on Wabamun Lake, will come up within the top results, and we get a lot of our traffic from Google that way, so long as we've got good content on that page. And so when the user comes to the page, they'll be going through the details on Wabamun Lake, and then after, I think it's 30 seconds, there's just a pop-up. Have you fished Wabamun Lake before? Yes, if they have, there's a simple Creel survey form, and we just look at collecting 4 core variables, and then they're on their way. So it's really tapping into that user journey they're already taking and presenting them with data capture opportunity. Now, I mean, we get about 1 million anglers on the platform a year, and so we're able to collect a fair amount of data. However, it's exceptionally low return rates on this strategy, and it does diminish over time, even if you are within their user journey. Always a good idea to think about incentives that you can use to improve that return rate. You probably, if you're going to follow a method like this, you probably want to be revisiting it and looking at modifying it to try and increase that return rate as well. But if you've got a large enough volume of anglers visiting, even at below a 1% rate, you can still get quite a bit of good data with it. Now, the other strategy we used, and maybe I'll step back. We really, we've been doing this since 1999, giving free maps. It was really only in 2018 that we really started focusing on the citizen science. And that's when we launched the MyCatch app and the MyCatch reporting tools on the website. And so the data capture that we're talking about here in the active data capture is really starting in 2018. And so what we did is, because people who come to the website, they sign up, become a member, we have an email address. We've got about 130,000 on their email address, primarily in Canada. And what we'll do is we'll actively send them out emails where we'll recruit them. And so this was part of our strategy in 2018, is sending, not only having the passive data capture, but also sending out emails, informing them about the new app, informing them about the goals. And the example here is an email I sent, I think it was July. July 2nd, 2 months after we launched, and just giving some updates on what the stats were, how many trips were reported, how many catches, what the average catch rates were, highlighting our citizen scientists. And certainly this is always key, and something that I know we don't necessarily do a great job on, but it's something worthwhile to make sure you incorporate into a citizen science project, is making sure you're communicating with your anglers and finding ways to reward them. And in this case, it was just doing up a citizen science certificate, and we'd send it out to each one of them digitally, or I think the top 10 each month. That's kind of fallen off the wayside for me, and partly because there's a lot of work associated with this, and we just don't have the resources to constantly feed into this. It was, and we can tell that on this side, we've started seeing a decrease in terms of the response rates on this. Now, the reason we've shifted in that, I'll get into that in a second, is we found a much better way to collect some really high resolution data. So as things evolve and we get more resources, we'll probably revisit this, but right now it's kind of on the, it needs some tender loving care. So this map shows you across Canada in the first, I think, 4 months that we ran MyCatch in Canada through this both passive as well as active data collection strategy, all the water bodies where we were able to collect data. Now, some of these water bodies only have a single report, so may not be of that useful. But because we had such a strong presence in Canada, we were able to collect pretty much across the country, with some notable gaps, certainly in Quebec. I don't speak French very well, so that is a challenge. But we were able to get a fair amount of good data, broad scale coverage. And just a quick overview of the stats. So we had 3,876 anonymous surveys filled in through the passive approach. And on the active approach, because we can track individual members, we know who they are, we had 1,607 members submit. So we had more reports, fewer members. But it's those members that provide multiple repeat trips, which is really important. So now I'm going to move into sort of our latest focal point. And this really emerged when COVID hit, because one side of the business really struggled. Our magazine side, when COVID hit, we were still in the sales process, and we saw our advertising revenues just plummet because everyone was pulling back on their expenditures. The opportunity, though, that got presented was tournaments. We have 2 strong tournament anglers on our staff, And they were noticing all these tournaments across the country that they normally participate in were being canceled. So we thought, well, we have a citizen science app. Why don't we see if we can modify it so we can also run catch, photo, release tournaments? So there's a strong conservation element where we're able to actively promote catch, photo, release, get the fish back in the water quickly, but at the same time collect incredible quality of data. I mean, with GPS and secret spots stay secret, only 4 of us on the staff have access to that data, and we're very protective on the GPS location, but it provides enormous resolution in terms of the quality of the data coming in. We also have a high resolution photograph. You can see here is a walleye being measured, and we have length information, because for a tournament, since we can't do it by weight, or we chose not to do it by weight, length is a good consistent measurement we can get. And what's really cool is you can also train a lot of the anglers when they're not measuring fish properly. By rejecting their catches, they quickly adapt their behavior, so they're measuring fish properly. And there are a lot of advantages to this strategy too, because the motivation's clear right off the get-go. You've got prizes and bragging rights, and the bigger the prizes, the stronger the motivation. You have clear start and end dates, which is often a challenge with a lot of citizen sciences. It's just ongoing. You're never really sure if it's ending. It's really hard to sort of sustain that momentum when there's no distinct closure to an activity. The quality control, as I mentioned, easy to tailor data requirements. And this is what we've been doing. So we've been not only built the platform, but we've been actively running them. So we've got a full team dedicated to the development of the tournament, development of the rules, also a catch team that does all the reviews of the catches coming in. And so this has allowed us to really understand the nature of these tournaments and being able to see how we can use these tournaments to tailor for very specific data types that we're after. So we often don't want just the longest fish. We often want the full length distribution. So you can incentivize various things by your prizing. So we can incentivize a full length distribution through a lottery ball prize, where every additional catch you add increases your likelihood of winning a prize. Or we can incentivize the smallest fish and giving the prize for the smallest fish. So you can use all sorts of really cool tools with the prizing and rule structure to adjust for your data requirements. And this really is well suited for experimental designs. And I'll get into that in a little bit on how we're using that. So now let's move into that data evaluation stage. So we've got data coming in. How do we know how good this data is? And I'm going to spend most of this part talking about the paper that was recently published in CJFAS. And the tool, or the way I describe it, is a benchmarking strategies. It's using known gold standard methods for fisheries and using our data and comparing it directly to see how similar or different the data sets are. And I'll touch on briefly machine learning opportunities. We've got this really cool new project we're launching with some research out of the University of Alberta, University of Victoria, and Brock University on applying Bayesian belief methods. And we think there's some really neat opportunities there. So let's just start with what a benchmark is. And this is a definition from Oxford. It's a standard or point of reference against which things may be compared or assessed. So it's a very broad term, and I chose it because there's often multiple types of benchmarks, and I'll show you in a sec what I mean by that. So the core benchmarks we looked at was a national angler survey that the Department of Fisheries and Ocean conducted, and they do this every 5 years in Canada, countrywide, and they do a randomized, with a properly randomized design, they do a randomized survey of anglers based on the province's fishing licenses. We also were able to get 2 creel surveys taking place within the jurisdiction where we were looking at, which was Alberta that year. And so we're able to do head-to-head comparisons with the creel surveys on the same water bodies in the same years. And then third, we looked at the fall index netting surveys that Alberta Environment carries out each year as well. And so those were our core benchmarks that we used. So, oh, and here's a link to the paper if anyone's interested. I guess, let's see if I can, I won't want to do that. Oh, I think I messed it up again. Sorry. I'll post this.
I'll find a link to it and post it.
Awesome. So basically, this is the province of Alberta. It's right next to me in British Columbia. The reason we chose this province is because we had some funding for it. So I was able to bring on a researcher, and Fiona Johnston did the lion's share of the work here, and some really good statistical analyses. And the map here shows you the province, you'll notice there's NB, there's these areas called NB, those are Northern Boreal, it's a Northern Boreal forest. There's 4 regions in the Northern Boreal zone. Then there's the Parkland Prairie, so more of the prairie type of environment. And then the eastern slopes of the Rockies run up along the eastern, or the, yeah, it's the eastern slope, but it's on the west side of the map. So that gives you a sense of sort of how the province changes in terms of its the ecosystems there. Now, the first thing we wanted to say is residents. Are the anglers that we're capturing through My Catch and Anglers Atlas have a similar residency as those that the federal survey would do? And so we did a quick look. So people fishing in Alberta, where did they live? As expected, most of them lived in Alberta. And again, the DFO and My Catch data was consistent there. Out of province anglers, second most province was from BC, and then basically negligible after that. But for both Alberta and BC, we had some fairly similar results. Now, within the province of Alberta, and remember I just mentioned the various zones, the Eastern Slope Zone, Northern Boreal Zone, Parkland Prairie Zone, we wanted to split that apart and see how similar or different the residencies were within each one of those zones. And we were able to do that because we collect postal code, which is like zip code for the US. And again, fairly consistent results. There's some differences here, which I'll get into a little bit. And then we're able, based on postal code, to look at rural versus urban areas. And we did see a statistically significant difference there, but overall the trends are still fairly similar. I would say if we had to identify a bias, there's a slight bias towards our urban anglers than the randomized DFO sample. Now, the next thing we wanted to look at was, okay, well, we've got a fair representation of anglers across the province. Do they fish in similar ways than the DFO survey reports? And this is where we were able to look at where they fished across the province. And again, fairly similar results. However, as mentioned, NB2 was way out. So we dove in a little bit and looked at that. Turns out there was a problem with the DFO survey, and the people reporting out which regions they fished and their postal codes, there was a misalignment there. Partly because I think it's kind of tough to tell exactly which region you're in. So that doesn't seem to be a problem with our data so much. It was more an issue in the reporting on the survey, which is good to know. Now, where we start to see divergences is when we look at individual species that are being captured. And this graph shows you basically all the species that are that were reported on both the app and DFO and the relative proportions. As you can see, generally we're in the same ballpark. Walleye, followed by northern pike, and then yellow perch and rainbow trout were consistent. A cutthroat trout was fairly consistent. Where you start to see some big deviations, certainly in the lake trout, and I think that had to do with a place called Cold Lake. It's one of the dominant lake trout fisheries in the provinces. But here's where you're starting to see some deviations take place, but still overall fairly consistent results. So based on that DFO benchmarking, we have fairly good confidence that our data is representative of the anglers who are in the province of Alberta. Now, the second thing we wanted to do is see, well, how does our data compare with creel surveys? And so what we did is we had 2 creel surveys taking place, one on the Bow River, the other the Oldman Livingston River Complex, and see how does our data on the creel side compare to the creel surveys taking place. So first thing is, what's the proportion of catch? The figure A represents proportion of catch in the Bow River. And the Bow River had a massive survey. I think they spent almost $250,000 on that creel survey. So very robust, extensive data sets. Figure B was a survey on the Oldman Livingston River, and it really focused sort of more your conventional creel survey, not a massive one. I have no idea what they spent on it, but I'm guessing probably around $50,000 or whatever sort of a normal creel survey looks like. And again, we had fairly decent results. There certainly are some differences. Cutthroat, rainbow trouts, you're noticing some differences there. That might be accountable based on the fact that rainbow trout and cutthroat trout hybridize in this on the Livingston River. But as expected, you are seeing some differences. But overall, you're seeing fairly consistent trends between both of those creel surveys in terms of proportion of catch. Now, this is above my pay grade, but this was basically some modeling that Fiona did, where she looked at the distribution on A is rainbow trout caught in the Bow River and time fished, and the red circles represent the creel surveys, the blue squares represent the MyCatch data. And so you can see there's definitely a difference. However, once she ran through the models, and this is, again, where I'm not particularly comfortable about how the model system worked. I think she developed a series of models and then selected the most parsimonious model. But based on that model, the catch rates for MyCatch and the predicted catch rate, sorry, for MyCatch and for the creel surveys were spot on. I mean, you look at the blue line and the red line, they're almost identical, which makes me a little nervous because rarely do I see that in nature. So I may not be sort of following much of this type of modeling in the future, but it is useful to see that we were able to generate almost identical catch rates using both sets of data. Again, I'm a little bit nervous when I see it that close. I want to spend some more time looking at other ways to start to evaluate this as well, but certainly a good result in this situation. Now, the final benchmark we used were fall index netting surveys, and this is where we do see some significant differences emerge. This is an example from two water bodies in Alberta. One is Lac La Biche here on the left, and on the right is, I think, Pigeon Lake. So on the left, walleye to walleye seems fairly close, but we see significant differences in northern pike, and then our anglers aren't catching any yellow perch or whitefish, and I expect that has to do with the fact that they're probably not that interested in the species. But this is where we start to see some significant difference in the reporting, and it's important to pay attention to that. We saw a very similar pattern emerge in both in Pigeon Lake as well, where the walleye seems to be fairly consistent. Northern pike is underrepresented based on the fall index netting survey, or overrepresented based on MyCatch. So that's a big question we're trying to figure out. And what we did is we took, I think there were 17 fall index netting surveys and that overlapped with MyCatch data. And you can see there is a relationship with the fall index netting catch per unit effort and the MyCatch catch per unit effort. It's not a super strong correlation, but there's certainly a correlation there. Now, the interesting thing is the northern pike again. There's almost no correlation taking place here, highly skewed. And so we start asking the question, well, what is happening? Are anglers overrepresenting, or the netters underrepresenting, or is reality somewhere between those two? And that's a really curious question. I know that one thing that has been brought up through conversations has been, well, a lot of these fall index netting surveys that are used don't do well in shallow waters, which is where you'll find a lot of the pike, but the anglers have no problem going into the shallow waters for going after pike. So that's one argument. I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done on this, but really interesting when I start seeing everything else lining up well, but this thing's so far out of whack. So it really does ask, sort of beg a lot of questions on that front. And so those were the benchmarking strategies that we use, and we continue to use those similar strategies, and I'll get into that in a little bit, showing how we're using it with the tournaments shortly. This is a new area. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but really exciting. We think that their opportunity for applying some of these machine learning techniques, specifically Bayesian belief networks, to some of the data that we're collecting on the website, as well as catch rates, might yield some really interesting information. This is a research project led by Mark Lewis. He's out of the University of Alberta, just moved to UVic. Mark Posch, University of Alberta, Priya Ramazi, Brock, and Julia Schmitz, postdoc at U of A plus our team. And essentially it looks at two things: developing estimates of local angling pressure and developing estimates of catch rates. Here's an example. The graph here shows you annual cycle for one water body. I think it might be Wabamun Lake. And this is website traffic. So this is people who land on the page for Wabamun Lake. And what we think is this has a correlation with the actual angling pressure. So we're going to take this data for all these water bodies, but we've got some page views on it, add in some additional variables. I mean, we'll look at weather and other variables, and then compare that with actual angling pressure surveys that have taken place. And the goal is to do this across Canada. And we've got several years of data on this now. So it'll be really interesting to see if these machine learning techniques can have any usefulness on that front. Now, I guess I'll sort of wrap up with So why does this matter from a research and management perspective? And I've got 3 examples that I'll talk about here. And this is where we're taking this tournament model that I mentioned earlier and applying it to 3 research/management objectives. The first is working with Iowa Department of Natural Resources, where they're trying to get a better sense of what's happening with their walleye across the state. Second is an event we're running, a bass tournament in Washington leading up to the American Fisheries Society conference in Spokane, where we're going to tag a bunch of bass and see if we can use a tournament to do a real-time population estimate. And the third is a brand new project just kicking off recently with University of West Virginia, West Virginia University and USGS, looking at blotchy bass across the U.S. So this is a dashboard, and this is what we built for our research and management partners so they can visualize the data. And I can show you real-time examples later if there's time and there's of interest. But here's the dashboard for the Iowa tournament that we ran statewide. You could fish anywhere in Iowa, and basically we had a total of 41 water bodies cataloged. Not as many anglers as I was hoping. I was hoping for over 100, but we got 70, which was enough to do some pretty interesting work. Of those 70 anglers, because it was 2 months and we incentivized them with weekly prizes and final prizes, we got a fair bit of data. We got 551 trips reported. This year, we've finally been able to add 0 trips to our tournament. So that's brand new on the tournament feature, being able to track the zeros. But over 2,000 fish caught, 1,795 hours, and a 1.43 catch rate across the state. Now, where it gets interesting is on this dashboard, you can click into each one of these water bodies, and then what happens is we get a graph that shows up, basically of a length histogram of all the catches. And now, in this example, and this is brand new, and I'm just working with Jeff Kopaska on this right now. What we want to do is see that length histogram for my catch, which is the blue. How does that compare to the netting data? Now, when I prepared this, I only had 1 set of data, but since I prepared this, I've actually got a couple more data sets, which really fills it in. But you can see the netting data, and this is from a 2.5-inch standard net that was used. It does a really good job capturing the larger fish. It missed that younger age class entirely. Now, some of the other data that I've seen through an experimental net that Jeff sent me, as well as the electrofishing, you can see that side of it captures in this end. But overall, we're able to collect some really interesting length data, and you can see that young age class. And across the state, I could see it water body over water body. And what's really valuable, I think, from the state's perspective is they only have money, I think, or resources for about 3 or 4 creel surveys a year, plus some of their netting surveys. So a lot of the water bodies that they don't survey go unmonitored. With this approach, we're getting data on all these water bodies simultaneously, and then we can also benchmark how good the data is against their known gold standard surveys, and then use that as an estimate of how good the data is for those water bodies, and then there'll be basically a proxy for all these other water bodies that currently don't have information. So we think there's a really valuable approach or usefulness for this tournament model for them and their walleye. The second event that's kicking off begins August 1st, runs to August 19th, and this is with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And really, it's an experiment to see, can we do a real-time estimate of the population in Newman Lake? Real simple analysis, although I certainly I'm looking for some more people who have backgrounds in population estimates, because I'd love to get their feedback on this. And the final event that we're really just getting into now is focusing on blotchy bass. It's the blotchy bass syndrome is a virus. There's really not too much known about its distribution across the U.S. or its prevalence, and so the idea is Canada and U.S.-wide event where we'll encourage people to report their bass that they catch, and when they catch a blotchy bass, somebody on our catch team is going to be able to spot that, and then we'll be able to start getting a sense of distribution as well as prevalence. So I think that's about it on the presentation side. Hopefully I haven't taken too long. Yeah, I don't know. Chip, what's the next stage from here?
So I will take back control, and it was I was told that I did not give an active presentation. So let me go back and give an active presentation for using the webinar. And hopefully everyone can see my screen now. Let's see. Yes. So in order to ask a question, let me go back. The first thing you can do is click on this button that kind of looks like a turkey. That'll enable you to raise your hand. If your hand is raised, it should indicate with a red arrow. After that, when you're on deck to speak, I will unmute you on our side and the webinar will tell you you've been unmuted. And in order to unmute this, just click on that button, make sure it's green. That indicates you're unmuted through your computer as well. The final way to ask a question is to type it into the question box. You can see that circled here. Others cannot see the questions that are typed in there, so I'll ask those aloud. And with that, please go ahead and raise your hands. I see Nick Smiley has his hand raised. Nick, you're unmuted.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for the presentation, Sean. That was excellent. I believe I've actually cited you in my thesis a couple times, so your work is really useful, and I appreciate all that you do. But I just wanted to ask, with this demographic that you've been, I guess, sampling through citizen sciences, can you see if most of your participants are doing mostly catch and release, or is there any catch and release in the fisheries that you've been monitoring?
Oh yeah, big time. Let me start with the tournaments. Some of our tournaments, we mandate catch and release as part of the requirements. In fact, some of them, the nature of the app when you're in a tournament, there's 3 photos or 3 images you can take. First is the length image, so you get the length of the fish. The second is a hero shot, because everyone likes to be able to showcase the big fish they caught. And the third is a video release. And in some events, we mandate that must be completed, where we have to see the fish swim away on its own energy in order for that catch to qualify. And so that was one of the tools that we use on the catch and release side. We've also got on the app, is the fish released toggle. Now we realized the problem with that toggle is we don't know if they left it closed, did that mean they harvested, or did they just not report? And so we've updated now, so there's 2 options on that. So I guess a 3-point toggle, or I don't know if that even makes sense, but basically, if they don't do anything, it stays in the middle. If they choose yes, I released it, or no, I don't, then it's recorded on either one of those categories. So it'll remove that uncertainty when it was just a single toggle on did I release yes or no. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was going to ask a follow-up question, and how do you promote best fishing practices? But it kind of sounds like, I mean, the video release is a really creative way to do that. And I was wondering if there are any other methods that you did to, kind of promote best fishing practices in regards to, releasing fish and handling them.
Totally. Yeah. Actually, what I'll do is I'll expand on that video release, because one of the cool things we do with the tournaments is we'll often incentivize good fish handling techniques and good fish release techniques. And one of the ways we do this is with the videos. So as we get a video in, they're great for social media. And and our team will review them. If we see videos that really demonstrate good fish handling practices, we'll often have prizes associated with that. And we'll do a subset that we think are good examples. We'll post them to Facebook, and then we'll get those anglers to basically, the way the contest is the most likes on Facebook will win. So it gets the people who have submitted that to get all their friends to like their photos. So it really drives up the social uptake and the activity on social media, but it's all focused around good fish handling techniques. And so it's a way to incentivize that. In fact, we've just got another event called Multi-Species Madness on the west coast of BC, where we're trying to get some information on rockfish. And rockfish suffer from barotrauma. And a few years ago, DFO mandated that you have to have a descending device on your boat, and you should descend the rockfish. Otherwise, they'll just float on the surface and become eagle food. So we're incentivizing, or we're providing some prizes, small prizes, but still some prizes for the best rockfish release, where they'll have to use a descending device. So it's ways that we can use the prizing to incentivize good behavior, but also as an educational tool, because then we're broadcasting it on social media. And that's one thing I haven't talked about, but I think it's huge opportunity in terms of education. You're creating a two-way communication dialogue with these anglers. I mean, I've never thought about this as a one-way communication. It's always, not only are they giving us data, but we have to be communicating information back in a meaningful, timely manner. And the opportunities to educate anglers on good fish handling practices, as well as, okay, what sort of science are we practicing, is enormous. And we find that a lot of these anglers are quite receptive towards learning about the nature of the science. Like the graphs I was showing you, I'll often show to anglers, and they'll start asking a whole bunch of interesting questions. One of the things I've learned is that a lot of these anglers are in some respects better biologists than I am, for sure, because they're on the water for, some of these anglers are on the water for like 150 days a year. I mean, you're naturally going to absorb what's going on in the environment when you spend that much time there. So anyways, I went down a little rabbit hole there, but hopefully that answers your question, Nick.
Yeah, that and more. Thank you again.
All right, the next question was written online. It's from Stacy Fergal. Is there a cost as a researcher to use your app or partner with you to use collected data?
Yeah, I mean, we do have to make sure we keep our staff employed, so I'm always on the hunt for more revenue. That's a never-ending, day in, day out. It's probably the thing that occupies most of my time. But we do this because we want to be able to generate data for researchers, and so really it's a case-by-case basis. If you've got a research project that you got an idea about, get a hold of me. We'll work through what the constraints are. I mean, if there's a way to generate some revenue so we can cover some of our costs, I mean, that's really, really valuable. If it's a really good project, and we'll often find a way to make it work somehow. So hopefully that's not too vague an answer for you, Stacy, but that's kind of my approach.
All right, up next is Marcel Reichert. Marcel, you've been unmuted.
Yep, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Excellent. Sean, a great presentation, really appreciate that. I had some audio issues, so I apologize if you addressed my question. I was wondering if any of the data analysis have been used for assessments and management, and the reason I'm asking is, would the analysis potentially allow for to investigate potential changes in reporting or angler behavior once they realize that that data is used for management? And do you see that as a potential issue in collecting the data? Thanks.
Yeah, at this stage, I don't think there's any examples where it's used to make a specific management decision. In my experience, and I've been talking with managers across Canada and now quite fairly extensively in the US as well, there's a real caution about how you integrate this data into your systems, partly because you're not sure of the quality. And the last thing you want to do is integrate data where you're unsure of the quality and you confound your results and you make decisions that aren't representative of reality. And that seems to be the biggest holdup that I see of being able to use this data, which is why we really focus on that data validation, the benchmarking strategy, because we need to find ways of building confidence that the data is good or build confidence that the data is bad. Either or, we have to find some way of achieving that. And the benchmarking strategy seemed like the easiest way to do it off the go. We're still very early in terms of being able to tie this in with management. I mean, the event what we're doing with Iowa, we're going to be presenting the results at the American Fisheries Society conference in Spokane end of August. And I think this is sort of that first cautious step towards how you can integrate this into management in some meaningful way. And I think having a benchmarking strategy is very useful for that. And so not only are you generating data, but you need to make sure you've got some way of assessing its data quality. And I think as we do this more and more, and it's not going to be a silver bullet, but as we do it more and more, there's going to be more comfort with using it. Now, to your second part of your question, will that affect the behavior of the anglers? I mean, the best way to know that is to actually run experiments. And there's certainly one thing that I've noticed is there's a lot of uncertainties on these things. I do see often that prevents people from often trying because there's so much concern about how it will affect things. In my experience, the best way through this is to set up small, rapid experiments like these tournaments where you can see, by doing this, are we changing angler behavior, and be able to monitor it and through time and through iterations, be able to sense how that might adjust angler behavior if they know that this is being used for management purposes. I guess I'll add one more thing to that, and that has to do with the nature of the tournaments. The tournaments kind of bypass that need because it's not just voluntary reporting. Like, these people will pay money. Some, like our walleye wars here, you'll pay $250 fee. So their motivations are a little bit different. They're not necessarily motivated by how they think they can maybe game the system or however. They're motivated for the event itself. And the data and the science is sort of a byproduct of that I think makes some of them feel good, but that's not the primary motivation while they're in there. So I don't know, that answer your question, Marcel?
Yeah, I really appreciate you addressing that. So thank you very much. A lot of cool stuff. And I think, as many have said, there's a huge potential for data that can be extremely useful for assessments and management and just understanding the fishery. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And the next question was typed into the question box and is along those lines as well. One of the hardest things about fishery dependent data of any type is response rate and avidity. Do you think MyCatch is able to account for that to get statistically valid samples?
Yeah, it is interesting, the avidity question, because I'll notice it as well, and it really depends on the nature. And again, focusing on the tournament side right now. I'll get to the passive data collection in a sec, but the tournaments, the nature of the tournament, you can tell differentiates the type of angler. And so for the high value, like the walleye wars I was mentioning, a $250 entry fee, first place is a $10,000 payout. You're not getting the new people, the people that have fished just a few times or just caught a few fish. You're getting the top 1%, 2% of the anglers, or at least the people who think they're in that category where they can actually win the prize, because there's definitely skill associated with that. And so you'll see in those events, highly the most avid people participating. When we're running events like our tourism events or family events, we do a big ice fishing event all across Ontario every winter, where it's really encouraging families. You see a much broader spread. And what you can do is, and one of the really cool things that you can do is, because everyone who signs up, you can reach out and contact them. We know who they are. You can do follow-up surveys. And so you can ask some additional questions. If you're unsure about the nature of the avidity of a specific group, you can follow up and basically have a follow-up survey, which we'll often do follow-up surveys, not for that question, but for other reasons. And that allows you to then check and confirm the nature of, like, how avid your anglers are. And so you can then almost use that as a measure. So it's not that that you're concerned or that you're concerned that maybe you have too avid or not avid enough. It's making sure you know who your audience is and being able to position them within what you expect the full spectrum of anglers are for your fishery. Now, I think you were asking about avidity on the other side. So I mentioned earlier there's two ways we collect data. One is passive, so people just coming to the website. I don't know who they are. They've just arrived here, usually from Google, and I asked them a question. These are anonymous users. I notice a big difference between their data and the data of our members. I mean, there's certainly an overlap, but there is a difference in terms of the catch rates that are being reported that way. Now, the problem with that data is I have no way of really verifying it after the fact. I can't go back and ask them questions where I can with our members. But I do notice there is a difference between those two data sets. So hopefully that answered your question.
I think so. Next is Tony Constant.
Okay. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Tony.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Sean, thanks for the presentation. I'm going to your data that shows fishing pressure on the regions, the separate regions that you've shown. Here in the South Atlantic, you know, we basically have North, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And we know how many people are basically fishing based on the saltwater licenses sold in each state. With your data, it seemed like it would be able to be applied overall to see which regions are getting, how much pressure is being put on each region. In particular, with bottom fishing, we're dealing with snapper, red snapper, as well as gag grouper. That data seems to me like it would be able to apply pretty easily to determine if this is some overfishing is going on.
Yeah, certainly if I had data for there, it would be fairly easy to do. I don't have any data for a South Atlantic, but as a proxy, this same methodology can be applied. So one option is to find some organizations who engage anglers already that may have some of that historical data. And what I mean is they've got to be large enough that it's not a highly localized. I'm thinking there's I think a Fish Rules app. They may have some interesting information that you could do some cross comparisons with and see relative to that. There may be some other ways. I guess the key would be you've got to make sure you're capturing a way of capturing location somehow. In freshwater, it's super easy because if you're on Wabamun Lake, you know exactly where that is. The oceans, you have to be able to divide it up into areas somehow. And I know on the oceans we do, certainly on the west coast of BC, we've got management areas, and I'll divide up areas that way, often either by using events to specifically attribute catches, or, well, in that case we have GPS as well, so we can do it that way as well. But that'd be, I think, the biggest challenge for the saltwater side on your end. I don't know. Well, here's a question to you. Are there any organizations that are collecting angler data on the South Atlantic that you could start to get a sense of general location?
Yeah, yes, we are. We've actually, the South Atlantic Fisheries has begun SAFMC, which is just started and beginning to collect data. And that's kind of when you showed your presentation, it kind of dawned on me that you were just talking about if you could divide it up into regions, which we actually can with each state. I mean, it's obviously we're not dealing with state waters, but we are dealing with state anglers. So the anglers themselves each have state-based licenses based on saltwater. And then if we can capture this data reporting from Sawfish and a few others, maybe we can relate to which areas are getting the highest pressure of fishing.
Yeah, certainly worth a test, and then you can compare it with, I don't know, I guess it'd be the MREP data set that you could benchmark it against, right?
Exactly. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and just to respond a bit, Brett Fitzgerald is having some technical issues, but he has worked in the South Atlantic region trying to collect some data through the iAngler program and through MyFishCount. Unfortunately, he can't speak right now, but I think he would be a great resource to speak to about it. Let's see.
Yeah, I've co-presented with Brett at a number of conferences, and they've been working for years on this. I think that's a natural data set to start, and I think they've got, what is it, easily half a dozen years of data.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions right now, so I'll ask one of my own. I heard you mention that you're working on rockfish, which is it's a aggregate of species, almost comparable to our snapper grouper species that we have in the South Atlantic. And I'm wondering if you're finding any challenges changing from like a single species or just a few species that are typically targeted in freshwater environments to the many species that would be captured when they're targeting rockfish.
Yeah, well, I guess this is where I get back to the tournament model, because that's allowed us enormous flexibility. I don't know, can I share the screen again and just sort of walk you through an example?
Sure, hold on one second.
Okay. Okay, and show, Google Chrome. Okay, show that window. Okay, so yeah, so this is basically our tournament screen here. Just a little bit. So these are all the ongoing tournaments we have, and this is something we launched last year, multi-species madness. We just wanted to see, can we start, instead of collecting a very specific species, can we start collecting as many species as possible? And again, so what we do is we motivate based on the species. And so this is an event we just launched beginning of July, and I've been having a lot of trouble getting data on the West Coast. I found that a lot of the things I've been trying historically haven't worked. This is starting to work, although it's a slightly different angler group than I was expected. And so anyways, the rules in this is multi-species madness, BC-wide event. Anyone can participate. I wanted as much data as I can, so I made the event free. I got a bunch of prizes from some resorts and guide outfits across BC and some tackle stores. And then all catches submitted through the MyCatch app. And it's not the longest, but it's how many different species you can catch. And you can see in this case, so Grant Bowler, he now has 24 species. This just launched beginning of July. And I'll be honest, I mean, there's so many species, I've got no clue. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of these species before, but you can see quite a broad cross-section. And what's interesting, and I think it's because I made this one free and with some decent prizes, so it wasn't a high barrier to entry. We're getting lots of young, well, I don't know if they're, I wouldn't necessarily call them kids. I think they're probably teenagers or early 20s showing all the fish. And these are all the fish they're catching. So you get a, I don't know what a hycock scum is, but a really tiny, that we're getting a lot of really interesting small fish around docks and piers, which we'd never really targeted before. But because we made it multi-species, so you can go after any species, we're getting a wide cross-section. And when you start to look, I'll show you what, this is what the organizer panel looks like on the website. So basically, when we run an event, basically we've got an organizer panel where our catch team will go in, and there'll be things like entries flagged for review, quarantined entries based on rules, that sort of stuff. Divisions, but so we've got currently 68 participants that have signed up for this so far, and we've had 254 entries come in. And then what we'll do is, here's an example. A sea run cutthroat trout. Okay, Colton. So this is an adramous species. They'll be born in freshwater, go out to sea, and then come back to spawn. But you see, very tiny. And which amazes me. I didn't even think we'd capture these small fish, but some of these people are specialized in microfishing, where they have really tiny hooks, really tiny lines. It's really neat to watch. And so that's an example of some of the species. Here's an example of the release. Okay. So again, this wasn't what I was expecting. I wasn't quite sure what I was expecting, but we're getting lots of angling from around piers, docks, and that sort of stuff, and then little dinghies. So it wasn't the big boats, which I was sort of thinking that we'd get. It was more the people that probably don't have big boats but love fishing, and we're able to then start collecting some really high resolution data on this wide range of species. And for us, we want rockfish data, so that was really the core. But we had to be careful because there's certain closures on rockfish, so we didn't want to say a rockfish event. So the way we got around that was just say multi-species, and if you catch a rockfish, we will reward good handling and good release practices with the rockfish. So I don't know, does that answer your question, Chip?
Yeah, I mean, it just highlights the difference when you're trying to deal with a multi-species issue compared to a single species issue, and there's some additional challenges with it.
Yeah, totally. And the key is you just got to throw yourself into it and start swimming, so to speak. And the challenge is, as you're going through, we can make adjustments. So if we find we're getting data in one area where we need data in another, we can start to shift how we're doing that, make the incentives bigger, make it maybe add in a prize for the biggest. I bet that would probably start to incentivize. That would start to incentivize a lot of the bigger fish anglers, the people going after the big ones. And I think, again, it's all about how you adjust that pricing and rule structure that really can sort of focus on the type of data that you're really keen on.
All right, any other questions? If not, you're going to get subjected to another one of my questions.
Okay, shoot.
So I'm wondering if you're noticing certain types of data are potentially most easily collected through citizen science. So length data, does that seem to be a little bit easier to collect than maybe catch per unit effort or spatial or temporal distribution of catches?
Yeah, fund length data was the hardest thing to collect, actually. And it was only because of the tournament model that we were able to start collecting that. When we started out with the first goal of my catch was, can we just collect catch per unit effort? Can we get a sense of how, of doing a comparison with creel surveys? That was really the primary goal. So we started with a very specific objective, and we built the platform around that. And the thing about creel is well, at least from ours, we kept it, again, bare bones minimum, just 4 core variables. What did I catch? When did I catch it? How long was I out fishing? And where was I fishing? Those 4 core required variables for the CPUE. And as we sort of focused on that, all those elements were necessary for that reporting to take place. So just by building that, it allowed us to collect that. We didn't get much length data though. We had a whole bunch of other fields that people could focus or could add data in. But here's the challenge: unless there's a reason for them to do it, they're not gonna, or very few will just sort of randomly add into it, which gets me back to that motivation. You really have to understand the nature of your anglers and what motivates them to report. I mean, the length data I was really interested for a long time, but it really didn't click until we started running these events where that was a core focus. You had to report the length in order to win the prize. And once that was implemented, everything's length based now, and it's super easy to collect. So I don't know if that answered your question, Chip, but that's sort of the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah, so basically you have to design your program to really focus in on what information you want to collect, or design your project for it.
Totally. Yeah. And make sure you're matching it with your anglers. So make sure there's a connection on not that you just need this data, but you've got to first answer why they're giving you this data. And like on our passive approach, why they're giving it is just because we're getting enough volume that we're going to get some people that say, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that. But there's really not a strong motivation. And in that case, I rely just on sheer volumes of anglers we can get in front of. And it's only once you start really tapping into that incentive that you can start to really drive a lot of the data. And so having simple certificates that give the angler back information and saying, yes, you're now a citizen scientist. I mean, on this here, on your profile, basically we've got these little things, citizen scientist badge. They're not huge, but it's a little thing that lets the person that's giving you that information know why, or know that that's what they're contributing for badges. But badges aren't a strong motivator. We did them because we think it's important, but I know it doesn't really drive a lot of traffic.
Thank you. There was a question that was typed in. Is the data limited to only collecting species and fish, or is there ability to collect other information such as water temperature or sightings of wildlife in the app?
Yeah, I don't think we do wildlife sightings. I mean, we had a different app called My Moose, which was all about wildlife sightings, but that's a whole other story. Let me just pull it up. So if you go to the app and you do a add catch, the first thing you'd see is basically a pop up of species. So you select your species. I may change that, and then you're asked to give a measurement photo. You take the measurement photo there, but in addition, there's all these other fields that later. All these other add more fields there. So basically, we've set this up so you can add in water. I think clarity, temperature, depth, cover. We've got weather, temperature, wind direction. On the fish, we got weight, girth, length, bait, fly, lure. The thing is, I don't think many anglers are really keen on these, and so we keep them secondary and almost buried, and you can have to add them into your catch form. And it's really easy to add another field. So if we were doing a project where spotting wildlife was a key requirement, what we do is we add that to the database. So basically, on our server side, add that in, and then get that as a mandatory field on a tournament, and that way we could collect it that way. So I don't know if that answered the question or not, but hopefully that's good.
I think so. I haven't seen anything typed in afterwards. Any additional questions? We can hear you.
Yeah, I was just thinking maybe I'll just do a quick show of sort of the dashboard, because this is where I think that connection with management may come into play. So this is basically the Iowa event that we were running, where you can sort of see basically across the state for the event, where, so these are the water bodies. This is where the angler participation was. Now again, secret spots stay secret, so we do not reveal any of that in the dashboard. But the information that we can reveal, we want to showcase. So where the trips are, this was the new feature on the zeros, being able to see the zeros, which was, I think, a really important part of the tournament model that had been missing up until this year. You can see where the fish are caught. So you can see basically Clear Lake and Big Creek Lake are the dominant. And I guess getting back to the question of avidity, I think our anglers on Clear Lake were on the more avid side, because when you look at the zero caught, none of them came back. And I know Clear Lake's a productive lake, but rarely do you get zero caught. So, I mean, this is sort of one of the techniques that we use to sort of tease out avidity. And plus we can ask them as well. We do follow-up surveys with them. And then when you dive in the Big Creek, and the idea is we want to make this a tool for managers to be able to go in, and let's say it's tied to an event, in this case the Iowa Walleye Challenge. They can go in, they can see for each water body or area what that length distribution is like. And so this is still at the early stages. We're just testing this, and we're now starting to add in netting analysis, so that basically in this case Iowa is going to be able to upload netting data. So at a glance you can say, okay, well, what does the netting data that we're getting look like? And how does that compare with our real-time data that's coming in? And as I mentioned, that large 2.5 inch does miss it, although I think that was known, which is why they do the experimental netting, the other one. But it's really good to have this, and the thing is, it's rapid. I mean, we just finished this like 2 weeks ago, and this was data that was collected in May and June. So the idea is you can rapidly do your analysis on this. This is I'm not sure what I think about it. It was just, I do a scatter plot with a trend line and an R-squared. I was just looking for a standard variable that I can compare. And there's clearly not a strong correlation between these two distributions. Here's an example, and one of the limits that I'd probably say about the angler data. We have a total of 127 catches, but we've only got one angler reporting this data. And so I don't think this is necessarily going to be a fair representation of the fisheries in that water body, because each angler is going to have their set practices and what they're able to collect. So in this water body, we were able to get, I think, 21 anglers participating. And the final one is kind of interesting, is Rathbun. This was netting data, but it was an experimental net design, and it was from last fall. So this was last fall's netting data with this spring's angler catch data. And you can see, here's that young age class on the red, and you can see that young age class with the anglers here. And it's almost like a 3 to 4 inch growth that you can see taking place. And again, this data would represent the bulk of it, and it would sort of represent these two large major age classes. And the biggest fish seem to be fairly consistent. And so it will be really interesting if I can get some spring netting data from Rathbun to see how the experimental nets compare. But the experimental nets seem to be doing a much better job of capturing the full length distributions.
Yeah, that's very interesting information that you presented there. Any additional questions? All right. Well, Sean, thank you so much today for your presentation. It was really informative, just seeing how you're collecting some citizen science data, how it's being used, and some words of wisdom on how to best collect citizen science so it could be usable in the future. So thank you very much.
Best of luck to everyone. And certainly, if you have any questions, you reach out to me directly. If you want to test the dashboard or do, the thing is, we can launch tournaments super rapidly. That's the thing that I find really exciting about them, is because you can do rapid experimentation. I mean, this event for Iowa, I mean, we just thought about this in March, and there's some build up and promotion you need to do to recruit enough anglers. But then you've got real-time data coming in, and you can visualize it. And so basically, the experiment ran May, June, and July, we've already got the results and some ways to interpret them. So if anyone's interested, please reach out to me. Happy to chat some more.
Thank you. I put your email in the chat function. So if there's a question mark on the bottom of your panel, your control panel for this webinar, you'll be able to see Sean's email address. I also wanted to let people know that next month our presentation is going to be on another citizen science project, the Fisheries project that the South Atlantic Council has been working on here. We're going to be presenting some of the findings from that program. So we hope to see you next month. August 9th is when the meeting or the seminar will be at 1:30. Everybody have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Chip. Bye, everyone.
And Sean, you have a good morning.